morning. And welcome. Got a special treat for you this morning. Last week, Dougie was preaching on commit everything to the Lord. And there's a lot of teachings in our owner's manual that support that. One of them is, don't let the book of the law depart from your mouth. And think about it day and night. And then it says, be careful to do everything in it, and then your way will be prosperous, and then you will have success. Why? Because if you commit your way to the Lord, you're doing what the Lord wants you to. And sometimes when we get off of His will onto our will, things go bad. You ever notice that? Things really collide. And so if you stay on the will of God. Now here is someone who actually applied last week's lesson. They didn't mean to. They just accidentally did what the Bible said. So, just kidding. This is Lee, and this is his story.
Hi everybody, I'm Lee, and I love Jesus. And I'm up here today because of something Doug Gordon said last week in his sermon. At the end of his talk last week, he mentioned a challenge to us all to commit ourselves, everything we do, to the Lord. Commit everything we do to Jesus. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background about myself to begin with, real short. I'm a recent transplant to Florida. I've been coming to our church here for about 3 months now. I moved here to open a new pizza shop over on Chiquita. It's called Lee Lulo's, a little plug there. We're not open yet, but we're planning on getting there soon. My wife is still in Pittsburgh. I am married to the most beautiful Christian woman ever, as far as I'm concerned. And it's been tough with her being away, with me being down here. It's been tough on her. We have an 18-month foster child, and God has been with us. Jesus has blessed us so much in our time apart. And the men's group and the men that I've met here have helped me learn how to get through some things, and have helped me a lot in my growth with Jesus. So just to help understand, like with this pizza shop that we're going through, we've been going through a lot of struggles. We are honestly almost running out of money to get it open. The inspectors have been giving us problems. So based on that, I have a testimony for you from Doug's sermon. After his sermon, I asked myself, how do I commit everything to the Lord, everything that's going on? And I started to look in the Bible, and I went to 2 Chronicles 15, and it sort of talks about what Doug was saying. It says that they took an oath. They took an oath to the Lord with loud acclamation. And one of the guys in the Bible study told me on the Saturday before to shout it out. Shout out your faith. So I did that, and then it says in the 2 Chronicles also, the Lord gave them rest on every side. They sought God, and eagerly He was found. So I took that and I started praying about how to seek God better, and based on Doug's recommendations. And I looked deeper into my notes, and in Psalms 37, chapter 4, it says, take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. And I also have to tell you that I've been struggling with some trust issues with God. How to trust Him and let Him work in my life, because I try to take control of everything in my life. So after reading these, I decided to let go and listen to what Doug said. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 16, I always ask myself, what is God's will? And the only place I found in the Bible where it says God's will is for you is here in 1 Thessalonians. It says, rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all circumstances. And right after it says, for this is God's will for you. So I'm trying to give thanks in all situations and praise God continually. So to get to the point, I'm leaving the gym Monday, and as I said, we're running out of money. There's some things we can't do at the pizza shop, and one of the things we really wanted were booths. They're almost $3,000 new, and I'm leaving the gym, and I turn to Ben, and before I turn to Ben, I'm praying and I'm talking to God, and I'm asking Him how we're going to do this, and to help me get through this, and to give us what we need. And in Applebee's, they're putting brand new booths right in the parking lot. So I went around back, and there's all their old boots, which aren't old. So I asked somebody if it was okay to take some of them, and they said, absolutely, please take them. And I got on my knees right there on one of those booths, and I just praised God out loud and thanked him. People thought I was crazy. I think they thought that, but I don't care. I'm not ashamed of my God who provides for me. And this has all happened since I heard Doug's sermon. We've been having problems with inspectors not showing up. The Cape is notorious for bad inspectors or lethargic inspectors. And just today, one inspector came and signed off on 7 inspections at once. And I believe it's because I let go and let God handle it. And he's telling me, you got trust issues? I'll fix them. I'll show you. Trust me. And I got this. And another brief testimony is for my wife at home with our 18-month-old foster child. It's very hectic because she's also taking care of 2 businesses up there for me. One morning she called me this past week, and the garbage was strewn all over the lawn. The diapers, the paper towels, the garbage man hadn't come yet. A dog must have got into it, and she was so distraught. Now I have to go out and clean up the garbage. And I went on my knees, and I hit my knees, and I just asked him to please relieve some of her burdens. And she called me back 2 hours later and said, did you send somebody to clean up the garbage? And I said, no, baby. And she said, well, it's cleaned up. Not only cleaned up and put away, it's emptied. Somebody came and did it. And then I said, oh, well, yeah, I guess I did send somebody. I asked Jesus to come help you. So I just wanted to share with you, if anybody's struggling with their trust or the love of Jesus, it's not easy. I'm a fairly new Christian. I've been a Christian for about 5 years. I'm a recovering Catholic, amongst other things. And I can't say that every time I turn something over, I get the results I want. But this last week, God has just flooded me with reasons for me to turn to him and say, thank you, Jesus, and it helps me to trust in him. Thanks, Doug, for the message. Have a great service.
Yeah, if you apply the teachings of the owner's manual to your life, it will change your life. It's just that simple. And when I was thinking about how we apply the teachings and how we follow Jesus Christ, I'm wondering, how does he get anything done using us? I mean, the church is not known for being like Jesus. It's known for attitudes that are very unlike Jesus, attitudes which are very unloving, and those kind of things. How do you get anything done through us? And I'm sure you have thought the same thing as well. Like, how does God use me? I mean, I'm so... I know who I am. How does the God above use me to accomplish his will? And so what we're going to see this morning is that God's hand cannot be forced and his will cannot be thwarted. He's God, and we're going to see that this morning. And we're talking about this is a relationship with God, and this is not religion. In fact, I have a strong dislike of religion because it almost keeps us from God. That was Jesus' accusation against the religious people of that day, that they make it impossible for people to get to God. You won't lift a finger. You just make these religions around your approach to God until people can't find God. And so religion, Jesus came to actually stop and to start his children into a relationship through him. So, I remember when I grew up in a pastor's home, and I heard the story over and over again. And I don't know about you when you started walking with God, but when I was a kid, it was, you want to let Jesus in your heart and go to heaven. And okay, yeah, who doesn't want that, you know? And so pray this prayer. All right, we're on. And I not only knew about heaven, there was some nasty alternatives, so I'll take that one. And so what? It wasn't that I love God. It wasn't that I love Jesus. It wasn't that I was in a relationship. It was all about me. I want that. And so, and I think a lot of people start the relationship with the thought that it's all about me. And you know, to a certain way, following Jesus, whether you believe the owner's manual is inspired, whether you believe Jesus Christ was the Son of God, applying this does make your life better. And it would at times put limits. My father didn't think there were limits, but limits on your behavior, because I knew that someday God was going to enter my life. And so living with this, and some people who actually followed this closer lived a better life and a more blessed life than me. You become a better husband, better father, better employer, better employee, better child when you follow this. And so this brings us to life, and it blesses us whether we believe it or not. So when I said, yeah, sure, now I didn't stick close to it for a few years, but the years that I've walked with Christ, from the time I started to walk with Christ till this very day, that would be 1973, you do the math, whatever that is. I was 3 years old at the time. You do the math. I think all of us start off with what's in it for me. Like, I'm going to follow Jesus because that's a good idea for me. And now, here, we get into a conversation with the disciples, and it's interesting that when we read the owner's manual here in the New Testament, it says that the disciples started off that way. What's in it for me? And so they became people that changed the world, but they started off like I did with, this is a good idea for me. So here, Jesus is talking about his death and his resurrection. And of course, Peter flips out and rebukes Jesus. Peter's much more wiser and thoughtful than Jesus. And so he says, you need to stop this. All that talk about death. You're going to be a king. You're not going to die. And Jesus answered to him, and he looked at his disciples, and he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but you have merely human concerns. Get behind me, Satan. You don't have the mind of God. Now, if you're following me for this, Peter is saying, I'm following you for what's in it for me. And I have my agenda to follow you to the top. If you're going to be king, I'm going to be vice king. And that's what's on my agenda. And so when Jesus says, no, I'm going to be crucified, I'm going to die. And Peter's, no, you're screwing with my agenda. Stop. My agenda is to be next in command of the king. And so even Peter, in his start, and one day Jesus was teaching on how difficult it is for rich people to get into heaven. And this is something we need to know in case we ever get rich. But for most of us, that's too late, because if you're making $47,000, you're in the top 4% of the world's wealth. You already are rich. Nobody jumps up and down and says, yeah, I'm rich. I'm one of the richest people in the world. Nobody says that. You are, but nobody says that. Why? We haven't learned to live rich. We'll talk about that someday, but there's a way rich people live in the owner's manual that you actually feel rich. And so if we don't jump up and say, hallelujah, praise God, I'm one of the richest people on the planet, it's because there's things in the owner's manual we need to look at. Now, David, in fact, he's teaching a class right now on how do rich people live. So we're the wealthiest on the planet. How do we live? It's another side. Back to your notes, David. Okay, thank you. Now, what does that mean when what's in it for me? It means we're consumers. It means we're consumers. And we talked about the fact, the difference between a consumer and an owner. A consumer complains about it, an owner fixes it. And so when we come into the community of Christ, an owner resolves the problems. A consumer just complains. Now, here, these guys are consumers, and Jesus is telling them the future, And Peter is complaining so bad, Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, when he talks about rich people and the high cost of following him is very few rich people, very few people in this room, if Jesus' teachings are true, very few people in this room get an easy pass to heaven. We need to read the owner's manual. But he was talking to the wealthiest people in the world. And he said, there's special things rich people have to do. Now, Peter says, how do they do it? Look, with God, everything's possible. He wants the richest people in the world to be his king, his children, but he wants us to live like rich people. And so Peter's listening to this talk, and he says, hey, what about us? We've left my father's family business. We had fishing boats. What's in it for me? I can't believe he was this blatant, but he said, we have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us? Now that's pretty plainly consumer. I gave everything up to follow you. What are you going to give me for following you? And we find out the way we know they're consumers was when Jesus, at the end of end of his ministry, when he was getting arrested, everybody decided to unfollow him all at once. Like, whoa, this is not working for me. See you, don't want to be you. They just left him and his agenda alone. But what you do notice is that later on, as we get to the end of the story, in the New Testament here, in the manual, what they did was they came back. Jesus forgave them, and then something happened, and those guys committed themselves fully to the message of Jesus to the world and for Jesus' plan for their life, and each of them died, except for John. They tried to kill him once, and he lived through his killing. And so they just let him go to an island and die. But each of them died, not for what Jesus taught, but because they saw something that changed their life. They started a movement. Now, what happens is when our agenda collides with the agenda that God has for our life, there's conflict and tension, and we feel it. We see Peter's agenda here. Remember, he says, you're not going to die. Stop it. Knock it off. People are following you. This is a good thing we got here. You're going to be the next king. Don't be talking negative. Don't go negative on us. Come on, say happy things. Talk about prayer, heaven stuff. He didn't, actually, Jesus didn't talk about heaven. But anyways, talk about good stuff. None of this death and dying stuff. So, Peter feels the conflict between his agenda and Jesus' agenda. And we often are just like Peter. We feel the conflict, but the guy who really felt the conflict the worst between his agenda and Jesus' agenda for his life was who? Who's the prime example? His last name is Iscariot. Yeah. Judas followed Jesus. He saw what everybody else saw. But when it came to personal agendas, he wanted to rise to power with Jesus. He wanted to be the treasurer of the new kingdom. And Jesus was going way too slow. And this bothered Judas. Jesus, look, if you're going to overthrow the Romans, you have to hate Romans. You're going to depose them. You're going to set up your kingdom. You're going to kick them out of our land. And what's worse is, one of the Roman legionnaires, one of the high-ranking Romans came to you, and you healed his son, for crying out loud. No, you have to hate Romans. And worse than that, Jesus, you have ostracized, you have criticized, you have disenfranchised yourself from the establishment of today. You may not have thought this through, Jesus, but if you read here, when God told us when you came and you started to set up your kingdom, those guys who you have alienated yourself from are the ones that have to announce you as the new king. So ease off a bit here. You got to hate these guys, quit healing their kids. You got to love these guys. You got to get on the right agenda if you're going to become this king who sets us up as a powerhouse again. Now, these guys all started with their own agenda. And that's okay. Most of us started with our own agenda. But somewhere along the line, we have to do like the disciples and fully commit to God's agenda and become part of the Change This World movement of Jesus Christ. Now, at some point, you have to give in, let your hands off of your agenda and grasp the agenda of God for your life. Now, I think that we're going to see this incident happened, this one I'm going to tell you about with Judas. And it says right after that, the next thing he did was betray Jesus. So this incident, then he goes out and betrays Jesus. What was that incident that bothered the treasurer of the new kingdom so bad? Well, it's in Matthew. And he says, while Jesus was in Bethany, the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar, very expensive perfume. She poured it on the head of Jesus as he was reclining at the table. And like, what are you doing? When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. It's kind of an awkward moment. It's like you go to somebody's house and they had their best silverware and their best plates, and you're going, what? You're serving us on this stuff? How much did this cost you? You should have sold this stuff, melted down the silver, and given it to poor people. Awkward. They were saying, that gift you just gave Jesus, that was money we should have given to the poor. Now, that's Matthew's telling of the story, but if you go back, remember the other week we were talking about Jesus walking by the beach and the disciples, come on, follow me, and then we read another account, and there was a few details left out. John tells the details of this story. He's telling the same story as Matthew, but he puts in some details that shed a different light on it. And so we read John's account, and he tells it this way. One of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. That lady dumped $40,000, $50,000 on Jesus' head. And it wasn't the disciples, it was Judas who freaked out and said, what are we doing here? That's good stuff. Look at a year's wages. We could really use that. We could help some poor people. Now, John doesn't stop there. He goes on and explains to us why Judas was so concerned about this extravagant gift to Jesus. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. Good old Judas, yeah. And as a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. Here's the deal. I got this group of disciples, and Judas is the treasurer. Now, how did that happen? Well, Judas says, hey, I'll be the treasurer. And they're looking around and they say, well, Matthew, you're tax collector, you're not going to, you keep everything. So, okay, Judas, you're the treasurer. And so the people give them money, and there was people who traveled with them, and actually some of the governing officials of the day supported the ministry of Jesus both before his crucifixion and after his resurrection. And so you had to have a treasurer, and Judas was the man. But he was following Jesus with his own personal agenda. And that agenda, Judas' agenda, was so strong that he was able to follow Jesus every day and at the same time use Jesus for his agenda. So he's a follower using Jesus to accomplish his outcomes. So now, Jesus would comment on stuff like that. It wasn't a good thing to say bad stuff in front of Jesus, because he was continually hearing. In fact, it wasn't even a good idea to think a bad thought in front of Jesus. He was sitting there, and he would say, Jesus, knowing what they were thinking, answered the question. Hold it, wait till I ask it. No. He would answer the question. So here, he knows the grumbling's going on, and he says, aware of this, Jesus said to them, why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing to me. Now, this is a political statement that we hear. The poor you will always have with me, but you will not always have me. when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for the burial. And so Peter, knock it off, this death and dying. That last few weeks, that's all you've been talking about. We need to get you set up to take over kingship and kick the Romans out. You can't be talking about all this dying stuff. And then he goes on. He said, truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Here's what's so interesting. 2,000 years later, and you and I are fulfilling that prophecy. He says, when the story of me, Jesus, is told around the world. What do you mean the story of you? You never even got 25 miles away from your home. The story of you told around the world. 2,000 years ago, how did he know this stuff? 2,000 years ago, here we are talking about him, and guess what else we're talking about? This lady who gave this extravagant gift that Jesus was upset about. He's telling us part of the prophecy we are fulfilling. He just did it a few thousand years ago. Now, right after this story, this perfume story, Judas, then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests. Now, that's that phrase, then. Judas just, hey, look, you got to get with the program, Jesus. If you're going to be giving away this kind, if you're that irresponsible, if you're not going to build up a war chest, if you're not getting ready to kick the Romans out, if you're letting them pour $50,000, $60,000 down the drain for nothing, you need to put it in the treasury. We need more money. I need more money. So he was not on Jesus' agenda. He was on his own agenda, even though he was a follower. And he goes to the chief priest and he says, what are you guys willing to give me if I can show you how to get Jesus and get him into court? And so they met and they agreed that he would give the scribes and Pharisees and the chief priests would give him 30 pieces of silver. And that, by the way, is foretold longer than 2,000 years in the future. No, it would be about 1,400 years. No, 1,000 was King David. It's in the Psalms. Be about 1,000 to 900 years before the year 2000. This amount of money that Jesus would be traded for is told about. Okay, so this history is unfolding amazingly accurate as to what's going on. And Judas has betrayed Jesus, sold him out for 30 pieces of silver. Now, he had traveled with the disciples. And think about this. Like, Judas, where did your brain go? Do you not remember the day we were all going to drown? The water was coming over the side of the boats. We were knee-deep in water in the boat, and we were going under. And we woke Jesus up. He stood at the front, and he talked to the weather. Remember? He talked to the weather. And what are you thinking? Remember the time he grabbed some mud and he put it in a blind man's eyes and the guy could see? Remember that? Remember the time we went to Lazarus' home and he had been dead so long that Jesus says, let me see him. And the family says, no, he's been dead 4 days. We're good. And he stood at the entrance of the grave of Lazarus and called a dead man to walk out again. You remember this stuff, don't you? And you think you have the intellectual capacity and the ability to betray a guy that handles that much power. Now, God was larger than Judas allowed him to be. And he was about to learn the hard way, that you and I can learn the easy way if we wish. Like, we don't have to make all the mistakes ourselves. We can watch other people and just say, I don't think I'll do that one. So here's a chance for us to learn that God's hand cannot be forced, and his will cannot be thwarted. Thy will be done, it will be done. He will see that it's done. His hand can't be rushed, forced, and his will cannot be thwarted. Now, I think For 2,000 years, we've been speculating why Jesus did this in light of the fact that he traveled with Jesus. He saw dead people come back to life, people who were sick healed, people with blind since birth, and all of that stuff. How come he could do it? Well, I think that the quick study is he was saying, you guys can't get him arrested. It's not because you can't find him. The biggest crowd there is anywhere, and there's Jesus. You just can't get him arrested because the people would kill you while you arrested him. So what you need to do is find him when you're alone. Now, Judas was thinking that when they arrested him, first of all, you have to remember, they really couldn't do anything bad to him. They didn't have power to kill people and all that stuff. And so they would become hyper-religious and explain, and Jesus would reveal who he was. And he would explain to them in no uncertain terms, and I am the Messiah. And so Judas was pushing his agenda, getting Jesus to proclaim himself, moving up the timetable so that he could get to be treasurer. This is speculation. But the stuff went wrong as far as Judas was concerned. And he lost control. I like Lee's story. Yeah, I struggle with this. I like to control everything. Yeah, that's Lee's problem. That's not mine, but or yours. He was in control, and then he lost control. And early in the morning, the chief priests and the elders of the people made plans to have Jesus executed. Executed? You guys can't execute anybody. Besides, you haven't had a trial. You can't meet in the middle of the night and say you had a trial. That's illegal. And they bound him away and handed him over to Pilate. Whoa. Now the Romans are going to decide the fate. Judas is going, this is not according to my plan. Everything's out of control here. The Romans have nothing to say about this. And Jesus was supposed to reveal who he was and start the conflict and the kingdom coming that will set us free. Now, when Judas had betrayed him and he lost control and he saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse. He turned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests. He said, I've sinned. I betrayed innocent blood. And, of course, they felt bad, too, and they said, what's that to us? Go hang yourself. So Judas threw the money in the temple, and he went and he hanged himself. Now, the interesting, you want to talk about hypocrisy. We can see it in other people. It's hard to. And they had held no trial. They were getting ready to murder an innocent guy. And they didn't have the authority, so they're going to work with the Roman authorities to get the guy killed. Now, what's the response to the 30 pieces of silver? Oh, this is money for blood money. We can't accept that into the treasury. We can kill a guy and commit murder, but put money in the wrong piggy bank? Now that will have consequences. So they didn't put the money in the wrong piggy bank. They just went out and killed Jesus. Now, they decided to use the money to buy Potter's Field. You know where Potter's Field is over there, just down the temple, turn left on Caesar Way and right on Pontius Pilate Street. And there is Potter's Field. And you know it's called a Keldama now, and that's how come it got to be called Field of Blood, because of that story. It was a little easier to tell the story of Jesus. Yeah, he was crucified, remember? We were all out there watching him. It happened back then. And he says, the guy who got healed, yeah, he's over there, third house on the left. And he'll tell you the story. The guy who could see, yeah, he's over there. And so Matthew's telling the story, and you know the field, Potter's Field, that now we call the Kildama. That is the field that they bought with the money Judas threw down on the floor. So here we are. Judas is arrested. Jesus is arrested. Jesus is tried. Jesus is crucified, and he dies. He's dead. He's in the tomb, but still, you and I can't force the hand of God. And you cannot thwart the will of God. It can look bad. It could have died 1,000 deaths, but you cannot thwart the will of God. He is in control all the time. Now, the Judas story has shades of our story. We said that most of us started to follow Jesus, and we all start with this. I have a plan, and I'm sticking to it, and Jesus, I need you to help me with my plan. And I have a will, and I want you to help me execute my will be done. And most of us start that way, and you listen to your prayers, and you're always trying to get God to go your direction, to bless your thoughts, and to bless your plan. And this is where we have these competing agendas. And you can tell when you come into collision with God's plan and God's will and your plan and your will. You'll feel this tension. And if you've been walking with Jesus very long, your conscience will light up and it'll say, danger, danger, Will Robinson, danger, danger. And your conscience will begin to warn you of an impending conflict and tension. And if you understood that, Will, you're old. Now, your agenda and God's agenda are not synced up, and you go into conflict. And it may feel like a death at the time. I remember when I was running my agenda, and I've been competing with another business. Pennzoil was breaking into Canada, and they wanted to get these quick lubes done. And so I had a lube factory, we called it, and then up the street was the Pennzoil place. And they were pouring 10 to 12,000 a month in there in order to corner the market. And I was down here competing with that. And finally, that owner went under, and another guy bought it. Now I had to put a new guy, new money, take him on. And we took him on, and he went broke. Finally, the third time, Pennzoil come down to me and says, maybe you should buy it. Close your building and come on up here and buy this one, and we run both businesses through our building. And they actually pretty well gave me the building. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they sold me everything for $72,000. And so I bought the building. I was ready to go. I'd bought the motor home. I was going to retire. I had a great manager, and I was just going to say, mail me the check. I'll be in California. Send me the money, honey. So we were going to homeschool the kids and travel and stuff like that. Right in the middle of that was when my argument with God about coming to Cape Coral was going on. So I had just had this huge success. I mean, I was all in. The last time, the last move that I made, I had every asset that I owned on the table. I had every penny I could get my hands on. I think I even sold one of my cars, and I was getting ready, and finally they folded. They cracked, and they went under. And so I had just been rescued from my own stupidity. But anyways, when your will conflicts with God's will and you give in, it will probably be so a part of you that it will feel like something died. There goes my whole future. I had my house on the water. I had my motorhome. We had the curriculum we were going to teach the kids. Had a manager. And in order to walk away from that, it felt like a death. Are you with me? When you come in conflict with the will of God, and you have to let go of your agenda, forget it and walk away, and commit yourself to God's agenda so He can bless you, then you have just had a defining moment that will change the direction and trajectory of your life for the rest of your life. And the good news is, if you don't take that advantage, there'll be another gut-wrenching advantage coming just down the road. All right. Now, let me give you an out here. Here's a prayer that you can pray, because this is so huge, it's hard to jump off a cliff. Listen to this. Here's a prayer you need to pray. Father, I want to want what you want more than I want what I want. Lord, I do believe. Now help my unbelief. I know that I should be doing your will. Now help me want to do your will. Faithful is he who called you also will do it. He will help you want to want what he wants. Yeah. Now, stay there long enough so that your heavenly Father who loves you can change your heart to be attracted to his will. Stay there long enough so God can deal in your heart. That decision to let your hands off your agenda and to grasp God's agenda will change your life for the rest of your life. Would you stand with me?